You know, they're not particularly wealthy. We get a lot of small contributions, but it really adds up.
Real talk, serious talk.
There's one hadith, saying of the Prophet Muhammad, if you see something wrong, fix it with your hands. If you can't fix it with your hands, then fix it with your words. If you can't fix it with your words, then at least fix it in your heart.
Stand around, I hold it down like a fort. In the midst of war, I find peace within. Alive as a gate.
Cambridge seems like a world away from Muslim reality, but as you've already seen, Islam finds a home in the most unlikely places. Tim Winter teaches Islamic studies at Cambridge University and also leads prayer at the local mosque. Born a Protestant, he's now a respected Muslim scholar and an eloquent witness to the power of the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca.
I used to do it with a group of bankers every year because I had a contact, and so I was able to hitch a ride on their bus. And at the beginning, they were just ordinary human beings, jostling, pushing in the queues, complaining about the accommodation, talking about everything except God. At the end of it, 4 days later, they were reading the Quran, they were making sure that everybody was comfortable, they were looking out for each other, they were handing out drinks of water, and they were genuinely transformed human beings. I remember going up onto the roof of the sacred mosque in Mecca, and it's said to be the world's largest building, and there's 2 million people. And you look at the great crowd that looks like a spiral galaxy going around the Kaaba in white robes, and this extraordinary still, dignified cube at the center of it, and there's nothing remotely like that you've ever seen. It's very weird. It's unlike anything else in Islam. And that has the effect of really forcing us to confront ourselves, the reality of standing on this planet that's rolling around the sun. So it's pretty devastating, as well as being unlike anything else you'll ever experience.
In everything we've seen and heard so far, there's something powerfully clear and consistent about Islam. But when you step back to look at the big picture, you begin to see deep divisions among Muslims. We've been told there's no disagreement about the words in the Quran, and yet in truth, there's endless debate about what those words actually mean. Writer and academic Reza Aslan is part of a new breed of reforming American Muslims. To him and many like him, Islam should always be a battleground of ideas.
Scripture without interpretation is essentially empty words on a page. They are completely meaningless. From the very moment in which the first revelation poured out of the Prophet's mouth, Islam and the Quran was understood in widely different ways. And I think any look at the history of early Islam really proves that there were always these multiple, and sometimes conflicting and often contradictory interpretations of what these revelations meant and how they should be understood. So again, those people, particularly these extremists, these Puritans, who are looking to return to some unadulterated, purified Islamic past, are talking about a historical fiction, something that never ever existed.
Today, Islam's at a moment like no other in its history. Rival visions and ideas now travel across the planet in an instant, and so, like never before, Muslims are caught in a global war of interpretations. That conflict is most visible to outsiders when it comes to the principle of jihad, what some Puritans like to call the sixth pillar of Islam. The concept of jihad was first revealed to the Prophet after he and his followers were forced to flee Mecca for the city of Medina, where they set up the first Islamic state. Jihad provided the guidelines for Islam's approaching war of survival. And like the Christian doctrine of just war, the emphasis was on defense more than attack.
You know, it'd be almost tempting to believe that there was only one possible interpretation of the concept of jihad. But once again, the Quran provides a mixed message, and so too does Islamic history. Because as Islam began its relentless march out of the Arabian deserts, the balance began to tip, and the balance began to tip toward the darker side of jihad.
Islam's early years were filled with turmoil. The religion spread rapidly, but that made it hard to say exactly who was in charge. The Prophet was dead less than 50 years when the new Islamic empire was rocked by civil war, a conflict that created the lasting divide between Sunni and Shia Muslims. The rivalry and expansion also strengthened the hands of Islam's militants, those who used the harsher verses in the Quran to justify their violence. Just like their ancestors, modern militants can cite verses of scripture to explain their actions. And yet even the most casual reader of the Quran will find other verses that impose clear limits on jihad. The Quran outlaws suicide and the killing of innocent people, for example, and it says Islam cannot be forced on non-Muslims. But none of that seems to matter to the militants. They choose the parts of the Quran that suit them and ignore the parts that don't.
In Quran you can find 17 levels. How can we treat with others? It started with fa'fu anhum wasfah. O Muhammad, you have to forgive them, to forgive your enemy. After this you can find another level. God says you have to fight people, you have to attack people if they attack you. And you can find more. After this you can find وَقَاتِلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ كَافَّةً. You have to fight others collectively. This is in the Quran. The problem is the radical people believe the last verse cancelled what come before. What about the tolerant verses when Prophet Muhammad called for love, for mercy? God